If you have dogs in your care, tonight's show is a must-watch for you. I have Heidi Youle joining us. She's an animal nutritionist, and she's specifically going to be talking to us about dog nutrition. Now, if you love your dog, if you want your dog to have the healthiest, happiest life possible, you have to start feeding them correctly. And Heidi's going to talk to us all about that. The show's about to start, so don't go anywhere. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Romy Bueller, and I'm excited for this show. Nutrition is one of my favourite subjects. As I mentioned at the start, I'm going to be talking to Heidi Youle about dog nutrition. Now, Heidi is an animal nutritionist. She is also the owner of Inner West Australia and the Naturally Raw store, and she is passionate about teaching us how to feed our animals raw. Do you feed your dogs kibble, dry food or biscuits, whatever you want to call them? That equates to eating McDonald's every single day. And junk food? We all know that it's not good for us, don't we? What goes in shows up on the outside. So have you considered that the anxiety, the strange behaviours, the itchy skin, all of those things may come back to the way they eat? It's very important that you learn how to feed your animals correctly. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight with our dogs specifically. Let's jump on over now and have a chat to Heidi. Heidi, thank you for joining me on the show. I am really excited to have you here today because many decades ago, I think, I actually studied natural nutrition for humans, and nutrition's been a really important part of my life, but also my animals. And I'm very interested and excited to be talking to you today about dog nutrition. So can you give us a little bit of a rundown on your animal nutrition side and what does that even mean? For the layman out there, what does that mean and what do you do?
So thanks for having me. And we're from the Naturally Raw store, and we have a supplement business called Inner Winner Australia. My father is a naturopath, so I've grown up in a naturopathic household. We've bred and owned show dogs for over 30 years. So everything that essentially we were taught growing up, I've basically crossed over into our animals. I don't care what we eat, but give my dog a preservative and I'll have an absolute heart attack. And it's the only thing I actually read ingredients and everything on. And so 15 years ago, we started the Inner Winner range with our very basic muesli, which is called Barf Natural, which has no fillers in it. It's got a whole bunch of ingredients in it that actually serve a purpose. So every ingredient is in there for a reason. And as people have gotten more aware of their own nutrition, they've then wanted to cross that over into their animal or their best friend, because obviously our animals are part of our family. So what we're finding, especially in COVID, is that more and more people are taking the time to actually learn about pet nutrition and what is good for them. What we do find is that a lot of vets recommend kibble, and that's because it essentially keeps them in a job. We have a number of people that come into our store, and they, one of the first things they see is we've got a sign up and it says, "Does your dog lick their feet?" And just about every person goes, "Oh yeah, my dog does lick their feet." Well, it's due to 9 times out of 10, not always, but most of the time, it's due to what you feed on the insides coming through the outside, and it's the preservatives. So kibble for me is no different to feeding your children Maccas every day. So it's full of preservatives. It causes a lot of behavioural problems. It causes a lot of anxiety because essentially the preservatives, the colours, the flavours that are in there are no different to giving an ADHD kid red cordial every day.
Excellent. That's just what we don't need, is it? And, we are 100% responsible for our animals if we have them under our care and they can't feed themselves. So we need to know more about this and do better at it, I think, from the human perspective. What do you find the most difficult thing? You obviously have people interested and ask you questions and things like that. What do you find the most difficult thing to convert people? What aren't they getting?
I think the biggest thing is they find it too hard. Taking a cup of dry food out of a bag, throwing it in a bowl, and the dog's fed, and not, having the time. With COVID, that's something that everyone seems to have more time because they're working from home, they're in lockdowns, those sorts of things. So they're actually wanting to learn more and take the time. And they don't have the resources. Like, everyone goes, "It's too hard." And I go, "Define too hard." I have 11 Rottweilers and 4 Bulldogs, and I go, and I manage to raw feed. And for me, it's, not hard. But it's thought, it's something else I have to prepare. I've got to think to take it out of the freezer. There's all these sorts of things that people, if you're going to want to find it hard, there will always be something you'll find it hard. But once you're into a routine of doing it, then, for me, it's just second nature. And there's lots of things that you learn along the way. I always recommend, especially because people don't know how to transition. So how do I start, is always the $1 million question.
Yes.
And it just depends on what resources are available to you. We make a single protein because we deal with a lot of allergy dogs. So if you pick a flavour and it says it's turkey, it's all turkey. What we find with a lot of other brands is that it says it's turkey, but the offal will be beef, and your dog may have a beef allergy because different proteins can cause different things, no different to us. We could have a peanut allergy, the dog could have a beef allergy or a chicken allergy. So we always start everybody on our raw boost until they learn, and then we teach them as we go how to make their own, essentially.
Right. I mean, that's ultimately what you want, isn't it? I mean, and we're all very time poor these days. So if there's people like you around, your Naturally Raw pet store around that people can purchase from, then, I mean, to find it too difficult to get out of the freezer and defrost, that's a bit of a cop-out. But, I guess that's where we're at sometimes. But, ultimately, if we start to take an interest ourselves in making the food ourselves, then that kind of, I'm sure that must make us more interested in our animals' health.
Yeah, it's just not that. It's the veterinary bills, like they all cost money. And the vet's like, "Oh, we'll just give them a tablet because that'll make that rash go away, or that'll stop them from scratching." And the money you put into that, when it equates back to your time, is, the food comes down to, next to no cost. Because obviously we all know that a veterinary bill is always expensive and ongoing veterinary care. And then the other side of that is the dog becomes too hard or the cat becomes too hard and they end up in a shelter, and then we end up, with overcrowding of shelters for the same reason, because people just don't know how to deal with it.
So what do you suggest to people with puppies? Is there a difference between feeding an adult to a puppy? I mean, I know they say there is, but what is that? from your
Most
perspective?
definitely there is. The actual basis, and some people, like, you can get on Facebook and there's lots of raw feeding groups and so forth, and there's lots of people that can be completely over the top, and I'm just like, my attitude is doing something, even if it's something little, it doesn't matter. So don't just get overwhelmed by people on Facebook and so forth with going, oh, you haven't done this and you haven't done that. There is a basic diet when you're talking about a Barf diet, which is referred to as a bone and raw food diet. So it's 80% meat or protein, 10% bone, and 10% offal. That's your very basic. There's lots of other things you can add into it, and you should always rotate your proteins, but that's the basic. Puppies under 12 months, for me, we feed at 5%. There is other nutritionists that do different calculations and they refer to the ideal weight of the dog. For me, this is just a really loose term, and it's confusing for people because they go, well, how heavy is my dog? Like, we breed Rottweilers, and you can get a small on the small side, and that they're 35 to 40 kilos, but then you can get a dog from large parents that will be 50 or 55, and they will require more food. So we always teach 5% of a puppy's body weight, which is constantly changing until they're 12 months old. And then they go to 2 to 3%. So it's exactly the same formula, but it's just the amount of food that you feed them.
Right. Okay. Good to know. So you've got someone in the middle of Australia or America or South Africa, whatever. They've got their little town centre and they've got their local butcher. How do people start? If they don't have someone like you that they can come to, what would they be doing? Would they be going to start with beef, and what happens from there?
So the essentials for me are chicken. Chicken's are always readily available. And a lot of butchers will do what we call a bone-in frame. So it's just your frame minced down. It will have 15% bone in it, so it is a little bit higher in bone, so you do need to balance that out. But for me, I always start them on one protein to start with, and then that also helps you know if they've got an allergy. So we start on one protein, for example, chicken or turkey. Some people will say, oh, my dog's got a chicken allergy, so they can't have any poultry, which is not correct. Just because they're allergic to chicken doesn't mean that they're allergic to turkey. Right. Beef is another quite common one. And where it gets a little technical is that there's warm meats, cold meats, and neutral meats. So beef will tend to heat the body up. So if you live in a hot climate, you have a hot dog that pants a lot, you would tend to stay away from beef. Chicken is relatively cool. Fish is great. Lamb is great. And again, you just stick to that 80-10-10. So the offal is probably the biggest thing that confuses people. Yeah. What is offal? So offal is what we call a secreting organ. So things like liver, brains, pancreas, spleen, those sorts of things is what we call a secreting organ, and it's vital that they do have it because of the nutrients that it actually brings, and it should only be of 10%. So we get a lot of people that say, oh, we just feed mince, but my dog's stools are, hard and so forth. And it's just because they're not feeding the offal. It's not helping to break that down. So the offal, as gross as some people think, oh, I can't deal with that, then that's, what they need to do. Heart is not classed as offal. Heart is classed as muscle meat. So because it's a muscle that beats and strengthens, so it's classed as a muscle meat. So a lot of people think that being that it's an internal organ, that it can be fed as offal, but it is actually a muscle meat, not offal.
Just going back to the poo, because I'm sure that's everyone's favourite subject. What does a good poo look like for a dog? Because I don't know that we regularly think about it. We just think, oh, diarrhea is not good and constipation's not good. But if there's a poo out in the backyard and it's solid, oh, that's pretty good. Food's good. Yeah. Is there something that people should be looking for or looking at
There's just like little technical. So if it's white and a lot of people go, oh, it's white and I just mow over it, it means that the dog's having too much bone. Right. So it needs more offal and more meat. So you're feeding too much bone. Obviously, and that will make them constipated as well. And it looks sort of like fossily. So, you know, that type. Obviously, the other end of that is, as you said, the diarrhea. And something to point out is the body requires different amino acids to break down different proteins. And it's no different to us. So if we don't eat red meat, then we eat red meat. It can make us feel sick. My daughter went away to overseas for 6 weeks, didn't eat red meat, came home, ate red meat and was vomiting. And it's just because she didn't have the amino acids to actually break that down, and she had to rebuild those by eating red meat. Dogs are no different. So people say, oh, my dog's allergic to chicken because they've got diarrhea or they're vomiting. And it's not that. It's just that you fed too much. They don't have the amino acids to break it down, and you need to just introduce it slowly to give the body time to build the different amino acids, because we say that you should always rotate your food to break that down. So that's really important. The other thing that can cause diarrhea is too much secreting organs. So if they're black, really dark, diarrhea, that type of thing, it's quite possible that you fed too much of the secreting organ, and it's not, not fixable. And it's just a guide. So the 80-10-10 is essentially a guide. So like us, you do have to sometimes manipulate it, to suit your particular dog. But once you get it, then they're generally pretty good.
I don't want to diss anybody, but I really struggle with the vegan style of feeding cats and dogs these days. What's your thoughts on vegan feeding for cats and dogs?
You cannot get the nutrients that they require because it's not how they are built. So essentially, we've just domesticated the wolf. They are a carnivore, they eat meat, it's 95%, and they will eat vegetables, fruits, berries, and so forth. But it's our choice to be a vegan. It is not nutrient beneficial to dogs to be vegans. They're just their digestive system and the nutrients they require, they just cannot get it on a vegan-based diet.
I totally agree. The other thing that we hear a lot too is grain-free this, grain-free that. I know that a lot of people are making up mince, sweet potato and rice, and par cooking it, or cooking the vegetables, cooking the rice, par cooking the meat. Talk to us a little bit about rice and, just like the orange vegetables versus green leafies, and like, is there anything that we should be doing with fruits and veggies within that 80-20?
80-10-10?
80-10-10, yeah. I just bundled those other two in together.
Yeah, those other two together. So rice and pasta are totally undigestible by dogs. So literally you're just feeding them a filler that you're picking up more poo at the other end. So there's a couple of differences you will notice with dogs that are raw fed and raw fed properly, is that the amount of poo that you get is very, very minimal, because they absorb and digest what they actually need. The other thing is that they drink very little water, because kibble-fed dogs, the way kibble works is because it's dehydrated, once they chew it and it goes into the gut, it takes all the gut juices to do that and break it down, and then then they need to drink water to process that. So they're two things that you sort of really notice the difference with. So rice and pasta are definitely a no-go for dogs. And, my mum is like, oh, we've always cooked it and we've always added rice and we make a stew and that's what we do. As time goes on and as you learn, their digestive system's just not made. So they are not made to eat regular cooked food. They don't absorb the nutrients that they need through cooked food. Some dogs, because we get people that come in and they say, Oh, my dog's really fussy, and they won't eat anything unless they've been cooked. And my answer is well, they just have you very well trained.
Yeah.
So a dog won't starve themselves. Essentially, it depends on who can hold out longer, you or them. So by adding rice and pasta, again, you're just making more work for yourself and you're picking up more poo. In relation to vegetables, so white vegetables we stay away from. So white potato we don't feed, but we do feed sweet potato, and it is a good nutrient filler as such. And if we're trying to put weight on dogs, then that's what you add is sweet potato if you're trying to bulk it out. So some people can't afford a lot of meat as such. Yeah. So vegetables are a way to bulk it out. Some people like to feed fruit. I feed very little fruit, if at all any, because you can then make them insulin dependent and then become diabetic dogs.
Right.
Because the fruit and fruit in a younger dog is easier for them to break down, but they eat very little fruit in the wild, and the sugar content is quite high for them because it's quite concentrated, and it puts more strain on the organs to actually break down and process that. So as a dog gets older, it's harder for the body to break down and do that. So vegetables, generally most vegetables are fine. We limit things like corn, but carrots, kale, green leafy vegetables, spinach, beetroot's great in moderate doses. Avocado minus the seed and skin, because that's the anaphylacity that dogs are toxic to. Avocado is toxic to dogs. Right. But it's actually fantastic to feed the flesh to them. So those sorts of things are great. But again, everything, it's no different to us, everything in moderation.
It's become very much, coconut oil, turmeric, spinach, and all of these things. And I think it can get quite confusing for people because that is so extreme from kibble to turmeric and coconut oil. And then that gets too hard because I don't understand turmeric. I don't even know what that looks like, let alone what it does. So let's just go back to PAL and biscuits.
And that's where we find, where I was saying earlier, you get on the internet and everyone's like, no, you're not doing this, and you haven't added that, and you haven't added this. Those extra things are just extras, essentially. So, kefir, so, people feed yogurt. I personally don't feed yogurt because it does contain lactose and it does have sugar. I feed kefir because whilst it is made on whole milk, and whole milk contains lactose and sugar, the kefir grains eat those, and it's a pre-probiotic that feeds the small and large intestine, so everything has a benefit, but again, it's how much you want to do, how little you want to do. So, and it does get very overwhelming. And that's why we have people in the shop and they're like, oh, have you fed this and have you fed that? And you can tell customers that come in, they're like deer in headlights. And we're like, just let them start raw feeding and get their head around that. And then we, teach them things about eggs and so forth, so we choose to feed quail eggs over chicken eggs because 15 times more nutrient than chicken eggs. And you don't need as many and you don't have to feed it as much. But, all that information when you're learning is really overwhelming.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that I come up against too is the cost, that it's too expensive to feed this way. Now, I know that we've got vet bills that you don't have when you feed nutrient dense, raw food. Our dog has never been to the vet outside of having to have an extra long tooth extracted, but that's just because it grew that way. So we never go to the vet, and he costs us about $4 a day. So what is your experience with how much, have you looked at how much does it cost to feed PAL and kibble versus a raw food diet?
It's really hard because there's so many variants. Yeah. So, I go, canned food is just terrible, and it's like the worst thing in the world that you could feed your dog. And unfortunately, everyone talks about AFCO standards, which is the pet industry. It's the US pet industry food standards,
Right.
and it is the minimum that a dog requires. So a can of PAL covers the very bare minimum to be able to say they have AFCO standards. Kibble, you know, for me, whether you're feeding Lucky Dog or you're paying $200 a bag and you're feeding Science Diet or Advance, you're paying, in actual reality, that kibble only costs 20 cents a kilo to make.
Right.
So you're paying for bag, marketing, bags, marketing, you know, paraphernalia, specials, all that sort of stuff is obviously because they're in it for business and they're in it for money. So again, they only have to put the bare minimum into it. So most people don't understand how kibble is made. There is only a couple of manufacturers in Australia that make kibble. So most kibble is made out of those two manufacturers unless it's imported. If it's imported and it requires meat, then it has to be irradiated to come into the country. Okay. So then you've got irradiation on it as well for imported food. The basic way that all kibble is made, it just depends on the synthetic vitamins they put into it, is that it is desiccated meat that is boiled because generally it is, you know, often of not quality of meat that you and I would think, you would like to think that's in it. Then they add fillers, synthetic vitamins and minerals, and then they cook it at 290 degrees to make it into a kibble. So anything that was already in it that was any good at 290 degrees, in my view, can't be too much left in it that's fantastic.
No.
But it comes down to...
Is it true that the fillers are things like sawdust and...
Not really. It's usually things like feathers, because feathers are 100% protein, but they have no nutrient base.
Right.
So they can up the protein without actually upping the protein. So on the bag, they can say it's 30% protein, but it's not meat like you would like to think, because they can add feathers, which are 100% protein. A lot of your fillers are soy-based type thing. I've not known any company that does, you know, sawdust, that type of thing. Yes, it's, you know, not of quality, and it's, you know, what we say in loose terms, scrapings off the floor. You know, it's quite poor quality that they use to fill it because it's cheap. They're there to make money, you know, and it's not just the manufacturers. It's got to go through to the retailers, you know what I mean? So there is a chain that they have to make money out of it, so they make it as cheap as possible. Yeah. There is a couple of brands that are really good, and again, you pay for it. But there is one at Pet Barn. It's called Prevador, and it's a freeze-dried meat. It's made in.
There's a bit of that out now.
Yeah, and yes, it's expensive to feed because freeze-drying in general is really expensive. The other one is Ziwi Peak, but Ziwi Peak's just been bought out by a China manufacturer. So I have noticed a lot of people are like, I'm going to start making my own because they've been bought out by China. But they used to be a New Zealand-based company up until recently. And so, again, you pay for what, you know, it's no different to us. You know, if you want to buy, you know, hamburger mince and it's full of fat and so forth, or you want to buy, you know, premium mince, you pay for what you get. The other side of that is the more nutrient dense it is, the less you need to feed. So it sort of balances itself out. So coming back to your question where you say how much does it cost, it's just such a broad range that it just depends on the dog size, the dog age, the dog weight, what brand you're eating, you know, compared to raw food. How long's
a piece of string? That's true.
Correct. So to give you an example, I have 11 Rottweilers, adult Rottweilers. I feed 5 kilos of meat a day, or of barf a day. I feed a lot of chicken because my bulldogs, I feed bulldogs as well. And it costs me about $7 or $8 a day, depending what we put in, which sounds like a lot, but I'm feeding 11 dogs, you know, and they're Rottweilers. So they're, you know, most of mine are I've got one that's a baby, but most of mine are over the 12 months of age. So they, depending on their weight, have between 700 grams to 1,200 grams, depending on the amount of work that they're doing a day. And we make a muesli, which in comparison to some other brands, we don't have a white base. So there is another brand that does something similar, but it's an all white based, and you've got to soak it for 48 hours. Our muesli's got alfalfa and chia seed and gentian and so forth in it, but you don't need to soak it. You can just mix it, and it picks up on all the extra nutrients that you need that you may miss.
That's great. That almost makes me want to eat some of that myself for breakfast.
Well, funny you say that. A lot of people that open our packets are like, it smells so good.
Yeah.
Because we have gentians for digestion to minimize bloat. So that's the other side of it. So dogs that are more prone to bloat. So dogs that stress, what happens is they feed them, the dog's stressed, they drink a lot of water, then they run around because they're stressed. And we see a lot of it in working dogs or police dogs. And police dogs have generally gone back to Barf. So unless they're out on the road and working, they will feed them kibble. But the dogs that are left in the kennels, they have found that opposed to a $40,000 vet bill, they feed raw, because when the dogs aren't working and they're in a kennel, that's an environment they're not used to. So they stress. Yeah. And then what happens with the bloat, the stomach fills up, the internal organs twist, and then it's quite detrimental. So the dog will die within hours. They have to go in, they untwist it, and then they stitch the stomach to the outside lining of the body.
That doesn't sound like a happy day.
No, it's not. And once they've got it, they're prone to get it.
Yeah.
So you don't see those things in raw-fed dogs.
Yes. So just coming back to the transitioning to raw, you've got, and of course this is different by personality and breed and size and all that sort of thing, but you have a dog that, maybe 9 or 10 years old that's always been on kibble and maybe some canned food here and there. Does it work just to go bang straight, here we are 100% raw today, that's out, this is in?
Again, it comes down to the individual dog. A lot of people do that transition because you can't control it. So it's a general rule of thumb that you can do it. We quite often, if we get to talk to the person, work out if the dog will tolerate, have you ever fed any raw food? If the answer's no, well then have they had upset tummies? Those types of things. If everything, the answer's no, then yes, you can transfer over to the raw. Again, it depends on the raw and that you're getting your balance right. Other than that, as a general rule, everyone says yes to transition a third over a 7-day period, and then another, then 2/3, and then 3/3, and then have them on completely raw. So if you aren't able to go into a store where someone can help you, then that's the ideal thing, because there's just a lot of factors that come into it, but that's a general rule of thumb.
With the people that just not going to change the way they do things, they are not going to remove the kibble from the diet, don't even try and convince me that it's a good idea, but they're half thinking that they might like to help their dog a little bit. What can you add into it to make that kibble diet better? And I know that this is not the ideal diet, but for those people that just aren't going to change, do you have any suggestions for them?
Any meat that you can give them is better than no meat. And meaty bones for their teeth. These commercially made dentist sticks and so forth, they're full of glycerol, and glycerol's not great for dogs. So giving them a raw bone, and there is some difference. So we use 2 types of language. One is a weight-bearing bone, so that's a leg bone, which won't be totally consumed. And then we have a consumable bone, which is like a roux tail, a turkey neck, those types of things. So they do 2 different jobs. One is, so the weight-bearing bone will clean teeth and things like a beef neck, because they're in a spine, that type of thing. The bones, the way the bones sit, they actually clean different parts of the teeth. So if you've got a dog, and we see a lot in more small dogs than large dogs. So a lot of your Shih Tzus and those types of things, they have the worst teeth in the world. because they only ever give them chicken necks. They don't really chew them, and they don't really clean the plaque off their teeth. And they tend to use their front teeth opposed to their back teeth.
Right.
So they have to have a lot of extractions done. Little dogs have a lot of extractions done. So if and you can get the tips of root tails. So as long as it's size appropriate, that they are cleaning their teeth, that's great. Some people worry about weight-bearing bones and breaking teeth and stuff like that, which, like anything, it can happen. In my personal experience in 30 years, I've never had it happen due to a bone. We give our dogs whole coconuts. So sometimes you'll see them at the supermarket, they'll be like $1. And they're literally a whole coconut. They play with them. They can smell the coconut on the inside of them. They'll bite the husk and they'll essentially break it, and then they'll eat the flesh and the milk out of the inside of them. A, it keeps them occupied and it mentally drains them. And B, it's such a great nutrient for them.
Yeah.
So
these are the brown coconuts, not the green ones?
Like just a whole, just a whole brown coconut. And sometimes you can pick them up when they're, for $1 and they're on the specials thing because they haven't sold them. And they're fantastic toy as well as food. We've got one bitch that just absolutely loves it. She will play with it for hours until she works out how to crack it. And then once she's cracked it, she's into the flesh and then she'll sleep for the rest of the day because she's mentally drained. So some people have energy dogs and they're like, oh, it doesn't matter how much I run them, they can't. So you've got to mentally stimulate them. Another way with the consumable bone is really good is we tell people to put in an ice cream container or a Chinese container, fill it full of water, put a chicken neck or a turkey neck in it like it's a big frozen ice block, put it in the freezer so it's only just sticking out a little bit, pop it out before you go to work out of the container, and it's like a big frozen block, and they have to work at it to get the reward essentially. So you're mentally draining them opposed to physically trying to drain them.
Yeah, I love that. I love the mental stimulation. There are so many dogs, maybe less during COVID with people working from home, although still a little bit of that, but so many dogs that are left home alone while mum or dad go to work all day, and they're bored to tears, and they'll start digging things and chewing things out in the yard. So I love those ideas, the coconut and the frozen neck. That's great.
Yeah, we quite often do it with our guys, especially if it's hot. We won't feed our dogs if in the middle of summer, if it's super hot, we'll wait till late at night or through the day. But we will put out an ice block with just, something in it that they can lick it, chew at the ice, cool themselves down, and then, they get the reward as well.
Yeah, that's a really great tip, Heidi. I like it. I'm going to run with that myself. Now you have, just before we finish off, because time just goes way too fast, you have some interesting other things in there like possum and crocodile. What do they do? Is that okay to talk about that today?
Yeah, that's fine. So for us, where my thing is to offer, reason we started the store, so we had the supplements. I couldn't find what I wanted for my dogs, and I was going here, there, and everywhere. So we found this little butcher shop, thought we'd have a go for 6 months and go. So we actually offer the largest diverse range available. So when things come on offer that, and we being in Queensland, possums are obviously banned. You can't kill them here. They're protected. We actually bring it up from Tasmania. So when they had the Commonwealth Games, they brought possum up for the Commonwealth Games, and they had it on the menus on the Gold Coast. So we bought some possum up for that. So we do offer fur on, and that's a bit of another chat about feeding whole prey and the benefits of feeding whole prey.
Yeah.
But we also have skinless, and we do possum pelvis, we do possum offal, and again, it's just another protein that's on offer. Some things you do have to be careful of. So we do offer camel from time to time, but there is a weed, if it's wild camel, there is a weed that they eat naturally in the wild that is fine for you and I to eat, but is actually toxic to dogs, and it does go in through the meat. So we only get it when we can be sure that it's farmed camel. Emu, that only gets culled once a year. It is quite expensive. You're paying about $20 a kilo. It's quite a lean meat. It's quite gamey, but it is a really great meat to feed. Again, it's just about mixing your proteins and giving your dog as much variety. Sometimes we get people and they're like, oh, they don't want to eat mince anymore. And I go, at the end of the day, do you want to eat mince in a bowl every day, day in, day out? Give them some chunks. So we do chunks that are like fist size that they have to break and tear and so forth. They have teeth for, so we try and offer the most diverse range, as possible. We do quail, we do whole quails, minced quail, those types of things. Again, and possum, just going back to possum, sorry. With possum, it's really high in omega-3, 6 and 9 oils.
Right, yes. And that's probably a whole other conversation too, isn't it? So some more essential nutrients for the dogs. That's really interesting. That would be an interesting conversation too later on too. We might get you back on and talk about that, the whole prey and that side of things. Heidi, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Do you run courses or clinics or anything like that to actually help educate people?
In our warehouse, we actually have a section set up to do it, and then COVID hit. And so we just sort of held off to do that. Generally, my staff are always trained. I'm always in the store. We do have a myriad of people that message the page and go, I just want to check this. And I'm always, because I'm all about education. You can only change one person at a time. Yes. And, you walk into a pet shop, and funny, in our area, a lot of the pet shops, girls that work there come in and buy meat from us, and they're like, no, go down to, the Lawton store. They've got lots of options down there. But your general pet shop is a 16-year-old that only knows what she knows, and, this is what's on special this week, and can give you that advice. So there are more and more raw feeding stores popping up. We do have a number that we supply interstate as well, and so in different areas and so forth. But we're always happy to answer questions and so forth. But we currently haven't. I have done some seminars more for dog clubs and breeders, because for me, it starts when they're little. So we raw feed our puppies from 3 weeks of age.
Yes, and this is the education and information we need out there, and I really hope that we can get to a point. I mean, Zoom has been great for online education and things like that. So we don't know what we don't know. So the more that we can learn from people like you, the better, we will be able to feed our animals and for them to live a healthy and long life. And I'm sure it's a much longer life and healthier and easier for them than it ordinarily would be with your dry food and your canned food and things like that. Heidi, thank you again. It's been fantastic having you here. And I really do hope that we can get you back, because there's so many dogs across the globe that need to be fed better, and you're our person. So I'm going to have all of your details online on the show, with all of the contact details and where you are and the interstate information as well. Thank you for joining me. Everybody else, the Animals Television show is going to continue in just a moment. We're going to jump on into the chat box shortly, so don't go anywhere. That's the end of our show, everyone. Thanks again for joining me. A little bit of a false start on the chat box. We're not doing that this week, but that will be back again soon. Don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the pages around Instagram, Facebook, the website, the YouTube channel, like and comment. There's this algorithm thing which just is too much for my brain to handle, but we need this show to be seen by people so people can be educated better to look after their animals in the way that the animals need. And to do that, we need to be found. So when people jump into Google or YouTube and they search something, our show comes up. So if you comment on the show, if you like, if you share, that really helps us generate a little bit of interest and get the name out there. And that's what we want. Animals need to be looked after better. I'm Romy Bueller. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you back here next week.